Hi, welcome back to my Bookmas series. This is technically day 3. I started 2 days before December 1st to kind of give me some time to edit and upload, and then give me a little extra time in case something happens, and just to kind of keep me up to date because I've never done this before, and this is a lot of shooting and editing for a full-time mom, aka me. So I thought for Bookmas Day 3, since it kind of coincided with December 1st, technically today is December 1st, that I would do my monthly wrap up for November for my Bookmas today, since I have to do this video anyways. This month is kind of hard for me to describe because half the month I had really great reads, and the other half I had really disappointing reads. And I didn't read as much as I usually do, but I read a lot of pages. I feel like I read chunky books this month. So let's just get into it. These are the 5 books that I read this month. As you can see, they're kind of chunkers. I mean, if you compare this book, which is 200 pages, to the rest of these, you can see how big the rest of the books were this month. So let's get started. The first book I read this month was Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I talked about this book quite a lot in some past videos, so I don't want to go too deep into it. Just long story short, I didn't love it. I really enjoyed Sally Rooney's Normal People in Conversations with Friends. I DNF'd Beautiful World, and I was really looking forward to this one because this kind of seemed like a more mature story that she was going to write, and I was interested to see where she went with it. For me, it didn't really work. The writing style was not my favorite. It really made it hard to get through. Personally, I know some people really liked it, and the characters were not really likable. I felt like the female characters were in there just to kind of be subjects for the male characters to figure out their life. And I know there was deeper themes of politics and class and other things that were going on in here, but superficially it's just a book about grief. And it is a long book. It is her longest yet. I think it was 400 and almost 500 pages. So there's definitely some beautiful writing in here. You can never knock Sally Rooney for beautiful writing, but the story itself didn't do much for me. So I think I ended up giving this one 2-star, which is a pretty bad rating for me. But this was so hard for me to get into, and it honestly put me in a reading slump. It took me forever. This is probably the longest it took me to read a book all year, and it put me in a reading slump. So I blame you, Intermezzo. Then the next book I read was an anticipated read for me, and was a book that I thought was really going to get me out of my reading slump after Intermezzo, and that was Jade City. I was thinking this was going to be really action-packed and a really cool magic system and fun characters, but for me, it wasn't as action-filled as I thought it was going to be. It's more of a political fantasy versus like an action fantasy. I mean, there were moments of action, but they were just small scenes in the grand scheme of the book. And the characters were great. I mean, I liked the characterization of the characters, the main 3 characters, but overall it didn't do much for me. The magic system wasn't really fully explained. I didn't totally understand it, and I thought it was a little bit of a weak magic system. I thought there would be more complexity to it, but this is the first of a trilogy, and there's 2 more books after, so maybe that gets further explained and the action picks up. This is really just a setup book, I think, as well, for a bigger war that is going to happen. So this just didn't do what I wanted to do. It was not a bad book, though, and I think I went in with different expectations and thinking it was going to be my savior coming off of my slump, and it just wasn't. It also didn't do anything special for me, so I'm not sure if I'm going to continue this series. It was also another chunker of a book, 500 pages. And I ended up giving Jade City, I think I gave it 3 stars. So not a bad rating. It was entertaining, it was fine, but nothing that really blew my mind. Next up, I was really hurting from those 2 books, and I think it was already middle of the month almost, and I was like, wow, I've only read 2 books so far, and that's really slow for me. And everybody has a different reading pace and different goals, and you don't have to read a lot of books, but for me, I like to read a certain amount of books so that I can feel like I'm getting through the books that I want to get through, because I have a long TBR and I have a lot of stories that I want to read. So I talked about this in one of my last videos, and I was really obsessed, still am, and really hyperfixated on this new show called Rivals. And it's on Hulu or Disney Plus, depending on where you live. Absolutely loved it. Found out it was based on a book, Rivals, and immediately picked it up because there's only one season and I just needed to fill the void. So I picked up Rivals, and this is by Jilly Cooper. Apparently this was really popular in the 80s as like kind of the romantic smutty book of that era, and I had never heard of them, but I think they're really popular in England and in Europe, maybe not so much in the US, but I don't know, I wasn't alive in the 80s. It is just so fun. This book took the cake. It was a little over 700 pages and it flew by. I really loved it. It followed the show, or the show followed the book really closely, and I really enjoyed it. And this really kind of gave me a breath of fresh air and was a book that was not on my radar. So this book was not on my TBR, and it was a big book to just spontaneously pick up and read, but I'm glad I did and I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving this 5 stars. It is just really funny and really sweet, and you just kind of giggle and kick your feet as you read it. Then next, kind of going on the romantic-ish kick, I picked up One Day, and this has been on my TBR, and it also was on my 10 Before the End TBR, so I knew I wanted to read this book. I have watched the movie and the show and liked them both, so I was really excited to pick this up, even though I kind of knew the story. And I was actually surprised how closely the Netflix show One Day follows this book. I mean, it follows scene by scene, line by line in many places, and I think that that's great, and I love that. And this was a really fun book. This is not a sweet and sappy type romance, which I enjoy because I like realistic love stories, realistic relationships. The sweet and sappy books don't really do much for me. And so I really enjoyed this. It's about 2 people and one day in the year for 20 years. So each chapter is like a different day for that year and where they're at in their lives and how their lives are intersecting and going away and coming back together. It is beautiful. I really enjoyed it. I haven't read anything from David Nichols before, so I definitely want to pick up some other books of his because I knew where this story was going, so I would like to read something from his where I didn't know the ending. So loved this one. I ended up giving this one 5 stars as well. And then lastly, the book that I picked up to read and finish off the month, I tried to pick a short book because I only had like a day or 2 left of the month and I wanted to get another book knocked off my TBR, and that is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and this was also on my 10 Before the End list. And this one really reminded me of Alice Walker's The Color Purple. I think just superficially, obviously, they both take place in a similar era. They deal with young Black girls, but there's so much similarities with the stuff that they go through, how they view themselves, how they're viewed by society, the hardships that they deal with, and they're both really sad. This was beautifully written. There was times where I felt like I was getting a little lost with who was who. I think that was probably just a me thing, and I was probably reading it really quickly, but there's some really beautiful writing in here. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I am looking forward to reading some more of Toni Morrison, and yeah, I think this was a beautiful book. It's really sad, but I think it has a really obviously strong big message, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. These were the 5 books that I read in the month of November. At the end of November, I clocked in at 91 books out of my 100 book goal, so I have to read 9 books in the month of December to hit my goal, which I'm feeling a little nervous about just because of how my reading pacing has been going, but I think I can do it, and it wouldn't be a challenge unless it was hard to do, right? So for me personally, I really want to hit that goal because I think if there's any year for me to read 100 books, it's got to be this year. We'll see how that goes, but thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.